2.5 million people around the world die from diseases for which we have a known, safe, and effective vaccine. And so that was really troubling from a global health standpoint. I just had an amazing team of individuals, most of whom could have been making a lot more money doing other things. They had left other jobs. They had moved to Boston to work with us. And there was just this commitment to say, I can't let these folks down.
If you believe in it, stick with it.
Like, if it's a problem we're solving, go find a way to solve it.
Two and a half million people die every year from diseases we already have safe and effective vaccines for. That staggering reality became the mission behind one biotech founder's journey. From designing cars at Honda to building an $80 million vaccine company, Michael Schrader shows how purpose, grit, and a little bit of naivety turn doubt into breakthrough innovation. Welcome to Stories in Life Sciences, sponsored by MedAccess AI, where we dive deep into stories shaping the future of life sciences and technology. I'm your host, Christopher Wilson. Let's dive deep into the story of Michael Schrader, former CEO of Vaxess. Where are you calling in from, Michael?
Yeah, I'm just outside of Boston, Watertown, Massachusetts.
Yeah, you're in the ecosystem of biotech and medtech, which I'm super curious to drop in more about. How you made the transition from, it seems like engineering into being a founder and into this space in general, and just your journey and your path and where you're at now.
Thank you so much for having me today. Really, really an honor to be here. Yeah, I think the journey for me into entrepreneurship was a non-traditional one, right? And so I started as a mechanical engineer, started designing cars actually for Honda for about 6 years, went back to business school about 15 years ago, really with the goal of trying to understand more about the business side of things in hopes that I could start a company someday. Ended up getting a pretty cool opportunity that basically fell into my lap. While I was in business school, came across a pretty interesting technology that was using silk, the same material you think of for the textile industry. The protein polymer in silk that makes it such a unique material turns out has some really interesting biomedical applications. So was introduced to this material through a class, was actually introduced to my three eventual co-founders, that company, Livio Valenti, Patrick Ho, and Catherine Casuta, also through that class. And the real question was, was there a business that we could build around this novel biomaterial in silk? And so that was really the start of the journey. Gosh, it was in 2011 we started working together in that classroom setting, ended up spending the last 12 years or so running that company before leaving it last year. So happy to dig in and give some more context, but I remember a lot of the early meetings, we would go in to talk to, biotech, kind of larger pharma or biotech players, and they would kind of look at me and say, wait, you're an auto engineer and you want to come in and help us do drug delivery a little bit better? And so there was definitely some sideways glances early on, made it a bit more of a challenge. But ultimately, I think I came in with a little bit of naivety, which can be really, really helpful as you're entering new fields, give you a little bit different perspective as long as you surround yourself with some smart people along the way.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that would raise some eyebrows, I think, initially. And then, but how, what did you learn from that? I guess, and two, I'm just curious, and just that journey from ideation, in the classroom setting to your journey, and any advice and the funding aspect of it too, and how that worked, and how you turned that from the classroom to actually something into a viable company.
Yeah, well, one of our claims to fame, which is maybe now a claim to shame, is that we are the only company to win the Harvard Business School New Venture Competition 2 years in a row. So we won it as a student team in 2012, and then we won it as an alumni team in 2013. And we used to put this on the cover of our pitch deck, right? And then I had a professor who came up to me and said, Michael, do you know why you're the only team that won it twice? And I just said no. And he said, because every other team that won it once raised money from venture capitalists and became ineligible to enter again. And you guys were the only team that couldn't parlay that into real money. And that's why you had to come back. So the first couple of years were a tough journey, right? I mean, coming out of the business school environment, we had done really well in all these competitions, things like Mass Challenge and the New Venture competition. And when we got out into the real world and realized we weren't competing against business school students anymore, we were competing against, serial entrepreneurs for the same pool of money, it was a pretty tough wake-up call, right? And so that first year out of business school, I think I made about $27,000, and that was all from winnings from those competitions, right? So that was a rough year. Around a year in, we had a painful first year in a host of different ways, but we finally, I think, a year in started to learn enough about the field we were operating in to actually talk competently about it. We got scolded by one of the great kind of big pharma players for some of the data we were presenting was originally in this field of vaccine stabilization, right? So if you take a vaccine, you mix it with our material, we had basically data showing that it was now very stable at high temperatures, so you could ship it without refrigeration. So big
Sure.
deal. It turns out the format of the data is a format that nobody in the vaccine field would use. But because none of us came specifically from the vaccine field, we didn't realize this. And so we were basically kind of laughed out of a couple meetings, people saying that like this data format doesn't make any sense, it's gibberish, nobody talks like this. So there were some painful learnings early on that made us realize we got to dig in on the vaccine space a bit more during that first year. Did that, kind of put in the hard work, continued to understand the science better, understand the field better, and eventually about a year in, we ended up signing a small deal, about a $60,000 deal with a European pharma company, and that was the impetus for the initial tranche of venture financing that followed, which basically said, okay, if a pharma company, even if they're only giving you 60K, that at least shows some validity to the science. So we raised a little over $3.5 million in 2013. Spent 2 or 3 years stumbling along with that initial tranche of money, eventually realized that stabilizing vaccines to eliminate refrigeration just wasn't enough. We were going to have to add some more value to it. The painful learning, I think, is that the people who are going to have to pay to make more stable vaccines, the Mercks and GSKs and Sanofis of the world, ultimately didn't gain that much value from this innovation. So a lot of the downstream distributors, doctors' offices, hospitals, clinicians, patients really benefited, but Merck and Pfizer and Sanofi didn't think they could charge more money for it. So there was this disconnect between who was going to have to pay to make a better product and ultimately how much value, or who was going to capture the value on the back end, that was just misaligned. So we went out and hunting for some new technology that we thought could kind of bolster this and really fit the vision of Vaxess, which was improving vaccine access. The name Vaxess came from a combination of vaccine and access. We found a patch-based drug delivery technology from MIT that we bolted on. And so it was essentially allowing you to do vaccines and other biologic drugs through what looked like a Nicoderm patch. So instead of a needle and syringe, now it's on a patch. Now patients can self-apply and it's shelf stable. All of a sudden we had something a little bit more compelling. So that took us 3 or 4 years to kind of make that pivot into, I think, a little bit more comprehensive business model. We made good progress there, largely thanks to grants from NIH, NSF, Gates Foundation, others, to kind of bridge that gap, get enough data, show we could really do this. We lived in that kind of very, very capital efficient model for many years until COVID hit. And then all of a sudden, everybody said, wait, why can't we mail vaccines to people's doors? And we said, hey, we can. And so all of a sudden, the money that started to flow in from venture capital firms, we brought in a fund called RA Capital for about $35 million. The federal government came in. NIH actually paid for us to build a manufacturing plant, which was pretty unusual. Wow. We got money from DARPA. We got money from the Department of Defense. So all these other capital streams really started to flow in. And that's when the company took off. When I left, we had about 50 employees. We raised a little over 80 million in both venture and non-dilutive funding. We had built this manufacturing plant. We had phase 1 clinical trial data with a flu vaccine, and we had signed deals with AstraZeneca to do mRNA vaccines and Novo Nordisk to do weight loss drugs. And so that was a good point for me to kind of step out and hand it over to somebody with a little more, traditional pharma experience. Ultimately, in hindsight, we got really lucky. We diversified into that weight loss field because now with a new political regime, you've got a complete utter lack of interest in vaccines again, right? So it's amazing how sometimes you just hang out in a space long enough and things go well, but when it goes well, you better think about diversifying because at some point, that hype cycle may fade again, which is what we lived through.
Yeah. Well, and I just care, like, what kept you going during some, it sounds, it's always a journey with some of these down cycles and iterations, like.
Yeah, I'll say it's 3 things. I'll tell you the 2 things that we always said externally, and then the one thing that I was always kind of ashamed to admit, right? So externally, the fact that we had a mission of improving vaccine access, I think really mattered, right? And one of the stats we had seen when we first started was something like 2.5 million people around the world die from diseases for which we have a known safe and effective vaccine, right? And so that was really troubling from a global health standpoint, and working with folks like the Gates Foundation was really eye-opening in terms of really the need for improving vaccine logistics around the globe. So that was one element. I'll say the second element was I just had an amazing team of individuals, most of whom could have been making a lot more money doing other things. They had left other jobs. They had moved to Boston to work with us. And there was just this commitment to say, I can't let these folks down, right? We've got to find ways to fund the company and keep this going and ultimately, achieve the goal that we were all striving for. So that was probably the second driver. And then the third, which I have come to terms with now, is there was almost an element of pride for me, because we had heard from so many people that this will never work. We don't know what we're doing. You'll never pull it off. So we just had this chip on our shoulder that was huge, right? And, in hindsight now, that was probably, naivety and immaturity, whatever you want to call it. But there was just an element in me that said, I am not going to lose. We are going to go out and we're going to pull this off. And fortunately, I had three other co-founders who were all hyper competitive individuals as well. And we all kind of put our heads down and said, we're going to find a way to make this work one way or the other.
Yeah, that helps. I feel like that I hear consistently too is like the mission part is such a key, piece of it, and it seems like you were all aligned on that as well.
That's right. Yeah, and I've actually since leaving Vaxess, one of the things I did was start a blog to talk about that element of it. Right. I think in the world of venture, the way that you're pushed to act is to basically have a hypothesis, get some money to test that hypothesis, and if that hypothesis fails, shut the company down. Right. And so this
Yeah.
concept of failing fast is kind of a key theme that's been around now for a little bit over a decade. And to me, that approach just flat out doesn't work when there's an underlying mission, right? If you, really single in on a problem that is big enough and worth solving, I think you need to try and find a way to build an organization that is robust enough that it can come at that with multiple different approaches, multiple different solutions, multiple different partners. And so the whole focus of the blog was to say, if you've got one of those mission-driven companies that is really solving a problem worth solving, how do you build a company that's robust enough to survive, even though the venture capital industry might not, be perfectly aligned in terms of, kind of that approach.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's inspiring, for me as well. I think that's such a key because I did biodesign at Stanford, and that was such a big thing too. Is yeah, iterate, fail fast. Let's get an idea. Let's take this problem, and then if it doesn't work, then let's pivot. Well, what if we really believe in the solving the problem?
That's it. That's it. And that's why I love biodesign. So I honestly rave about that because it's such a problem-centric approach that
Yeah.
is much better than the class we came out of was called commercializing science, where you start with science first and then you try and find a problem to solve. That is
East
not
West
what it
Coast.
is. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly,
seriously, that's what it feels like.
exactly. Yep. So I wish I had gone through biodesign, honestly. It took me years to learn about that and said, man, that's it. They've got an idea. But again, the venture model is not necessarily built for that, right? So you've got to be creative as an entrepreneur to keep that mission and that problem high and really build around it.
Yeah, and then I see that, and that was now in your article that Robert Redford. It actually made me realize how much I like Robert Redford, and it made me think back to like I can't remember the baseball movie that I hadn't thought about in forever. Yeah, that I hadn't thought about in forever. But then in that you were writing about just the ecosystem that exists now, and some of that just feels like it's aligned with this as well. Like, how do you align the venture capital and the model with trying to encourage young entrepreneurs that are mission driven, that may not be necessarily aligned with the dollars and cents on every, and just what do you see that moving forward, and just more your thoughts on that.
I wrote the Robert Redford article because I had always appreciated his movies, like you, but I did
Yeah.
not realize that he had founded the Sundance Film
I
Festival.
didn't either
Nope. So
until
that
I
was a
read
cool
that.
one
I
for
was
me.
like, what? I had no
Exactly.
idea.
And his whole goal there was to basically give kind of a venue for new up and coming directors, producers, actors to really showcase their talents, right? And out of that, we got Quentin Tarantino, we got a host of other folks that might have been a little bit too far outside the traditional
Yeah.
Hollywood norm, right? And might not have had their chance. And so, in thinking about the biotech ecosystem, obviously I'm much more familiar with the Boston ecosystem. I think 20 or 30 years ago, you had a lot of, I'll say, naive first-time founders and CEOs that ended up building some pretty exciting companies. So I think Henry Termier was something like 29 when he founded Genzyme, or I don't know if he founded or took over as CEO of Genzyme, but he was very young. And there's case study after case study of this, right? And I think what you see with these companies is they were trying to do things that sounded crazy, right?
Yeah.
And the only way that kind of works is you've got to have a lot of investors who say, you know what, this guy probably has some bad ideas, right? Or this woman's going to fail at a couple things along the way. But ultimately, I think they're crazy enough, they're hardworking enough, they're persistent enough, they're driven enough. I'm willing to take a risk on some of these folks and really give them that opportunity in hopes that we'll find that Quentin Tarantino. And I think what's happened to the venture ecosystem in Boston, which has been really troubling, is we've seen funds transition from backing founders to starting ventures in-house and doing in-house venture incubation, right? And so this is the flagship model. This is Third Rock Capital. And that model has driven great returns for those investors, right? I think it's worked. It's brought big money in. You've had some good products launch. Obviously, Moderna came out of the flagship incubator. But I think what's been lost is that I don't see a lot of kind of younger first time founders getting funded to go chase naive dreams. I understand it if it's purely a monetary element, but I think ultimately,
Yeah.
in the long run, you've got to have some of these individuals getting that shot on goal, going after those fields that other people think sound a little bit wild and weird and crazy. A lot of them are going to fail, but if they're not getting the chance, you're not going to have the next wave of Genzymes. You're not going to have the next wave of kind of those big, massive, disruptive companies. You're just going to have little iterative companies that are, another GLP-1 alternative, right? Or another, another Keytruda clone. I don't know, right? I think there's a couple
Yeah.
fields that will get funded over and over again, but those folks doing some weird sounding things just are not getting the funding I think they were 10 or 15 years ago. It's troubling.
I mean, any thoughts as far as solutions on that? How do we, I mean, not just have it run through an algorithm and have it actually be betting on people and
Yeah, I think a lot of it to me comes down to this 10-year fund model most venture capital firms operate under is just really, really tough for biotech, right? And
yeah.
so the dream scenario for these venture funds is deploy capital in the first 2 years into new companies, spend the next 3 to 4 years kind of helping those companies grow, putting in more capital, and then you're harvesting in the last 4 years or so. And really, the way that that's worked in biotech over the past decade is you find companies that can very rapidly get one or two programs into the clinic, and those companies can get acquired. That's really the only pathway to doing that right now. And so, if I'm a venture capital firm, I'm looking at that and saying, I've got to back, industry veterans who know how to do drug development incredibly quickly, incredibly efficiently, and are operating in areas where there's a built-out ecosystem, right? There are contract manufacturers that know how to make these
Yeah.
antibodies, right? There are analytical labs that know how to, do all the downstream analytics and release. There are clinical sites that have done lots and lots of trials for Keytruda type molecules for cancer, right? The difference is that let's say 3 or 4 years ago, you had an IPO market, and a lot of the companies that were going public were bigger, dreams, wilder ideas. Maybe they only had preclinical data or phase one data, but they were at least providing some liquidity for investors that allowed them to come out with something that looked like a win. With the IPO market in the dumpster right now, I just think those companies are not getting funded anymore. If you don't have a veteran CEO, a veteran CSO, and a clear path to phase two trial in 4 or 5 years, you're just not going to get a check at this point.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's I guess I feel that it's also inspiring some creativity that I'm seeing as I go out there because there aren't those typical models that funding isn't as much available. So it's creating these unique incubator systems in some different, places that makes me excited. I don't know if you have some of those that are existing or you're seeing popping up in Boston at all.
Yeah, it's such a good point. The cost of doing a lot of that early stuff has come down. So we got really lucky. We were the first company in the Harvard iLab, which despite the name is not actually a lab, it's just an office, but it was the first
Yeah.
kind of university affiliated incubator, or one of the first. We then moved into Lab Central, which was a lab, a nonprofit lab incubator in the heart of Cambridge, funded by the state of Massachusetts. And we were the first company there. And then we were the first company in the Harvard Life Lab, which was actually a Harvard affiliated incubator. So yeah, we did a lot of that early on, and it did allow us to do a lot of experimentation, keeping our costs low. We could live on grants, $2 or $3 million grants that normally wouldn't have been nearly enough to move things along. So that is great, and the ecosystems that they've created and fostered are fantastic. So I agree. That's reason for hope. I also think the state of Massachusetts, through the Massachusetts Life Science Center, used to be an incredible advocate for early stage companies. And they've now really changed a lot of their programs and I think cut back on their funding a little bit. So they kind of feel like they did their job. They turned Mass into this biotech powerhouse, and now they feel like they can step back, which from
Uh,
a from a total value creation standpoint, that may be true. But again, I think you've taken away one of the lifelines that companies like ours used. We got $1 million from the state of Massachusetts very early on that we would have died without. So some of those programs, I think, were very helpful in our early days too.
yeah, no, that's true. And then you touched on one of the things early is that from a team standpoint, you all kind of had this, we're aligned with this crazy vision and this competitive nature. And I'm just curious now, or just any advice that you would have in just choosing the right people to start a company with. The idea is one thing, but if you don't have the right people around you and just for you moving forward, I mean, how you think about that, like people
Yeah.
that you choose to start something with.
No, it's such an important question. I'm still trying to think about kind of like good guidelines and general rules for this. I think Founders Dilemmas has a lot of data on, these things and how to approach these. I don't fully agree with all the approaches of Founder's Dilemma, but they've got the data. So if you want the hard data on what founding teams tend to work and don't work, that book is great.
No, I don't want that. I want
Yeah, you don't want that. No.
the yeah.
Let's tell the fun story of Vaxess. We had 4 founders. So again, I was an auto engineer getting his MBA, trying to start a vaccine company, right? Yeah.
That's where you want to. I'm sure that's not in the book on where you would start.
Out of the book. Out of the book.
Yeah.
Perfectly terrible fit. My second co-founder was a physicist who had actually worked at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Lab, who is back at law school. So again, no vaccine experience, no drug development experience. One of the smartest people I've ever worked with. My third co-founder had an economics background and had worked for the United Nations previously. So again, he understood kind of the world of global health and government funding, non-dilutive funding, NGOs, things like that, but no vaccine development experience. And our fourth co-founder, who was the only one of us who really had strong technical chops, was doing her postdoc in chemistry at Harvard, but she had been doing some obscure surface chemistry that was very researchy, right? And so she had spent a couple years at Merck, like 3 years at Merck between her undergrad and PhD, but still very non-traditional for the founding team, right? And so I think if you look back at that team, we had very naive, grand ambitions, right? And again, we all had mild chips on our shoulder from getting told it's not going to work, you're not going to pull it off, right? That we really, really felt passionate about finding ways to go find the solutions that would allow us to get there. We knew from day one we had each other's backs. And so there were a couple of venture funds early on that had read Founders Dilemmas. This was a very big deal when we were starting the company. And they basically said, if we fired the lawyer and the economist, they would cut us a check tomorrow. So they really just wanted one business person and one scientist. They said, if we're going to cut you a check for $1 million, we don't need to be paying these other two, right? We turned that money down. We refused to take it. And so immediately there was kind of a bond between the 4 of us, right? Like, we're going to have each other's backs. We are not going to let outsiders kind of rip us apart, tear us apart. And there's a reason that, one of the lawyer ended up leaving, unfortunately, for family reasons after about 5 years to go to New York. The other 3 of us were still there until I left last year. And the two, the economist and the chemist, are both still there, really still leading the charge at Vaxess. So it was an amazing kind of bond that I think we all shared. The second learning from that, for me, is that me and the economist, his name was Livio Valenti, at the time, I did not appreciate Livio nearly as much as I should have. When I talk about Livio now, I think Livio can see 10, 15, 20 years in the future in the way that very few people can, right? And what I was probably good at is maybe 3 to 5 years in the future. But we would always have these disconnects where he'd say, no, you've got to trust me. Like, this is where this is going. And I'd say, no, you're crazy. Like, it's not going to work out like that. And sure enough, in hindsight, most of the time he was right. So having people around the table that are not just yes people and are not just nodding along and don't all have the same background or the same worldview was the single most valuable thing we could have done, I think, to keep this company up and running and get it funded. And it took me, again, 3, 4, 5 years of working together with Livio to be like, man, that guy actually was spot on a couple of years ago when he talked about where the world was going. So don't give up on those co-founders early on that might have very different visions of how the company should grow, of where you should be going, markets. There might be gems of gold in there. And if you're able to have a healthy, lively discussion, I think ultimately you're going to arrive at a much better solution than having 4 people sitting around the table that all have the kind of same worldview, same perspective, same background.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's such good advice. Just that adversity that you all had and turning that money down. Good for you too. Like, that's what a way to build some really serious cohesion early on. And when you're saying no to that, when I'm sure you needed it. Like, I mean,
if I tell you some of the stories from that first year, we rented out our driveway to make extra money. The people we rented it out to ended up founding a company called Love Pop Cards. I don't know if you've seen these, but really cool cards that like open up and have 3D art inside of them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So they were literally renting my driveway while starting their company, went on to be much more successful than us. We bought something called a portable washing machine. I don't know if you've seen these things, but they're literally like, we got it on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist at the time, whatever. It's this little washing machine on wheels that you can literally roll into your kitchen and hook up to your sink in your kitchen and put a little drain pipe down your sink. So we did that so we didn't have to pay for laundry. We had drying racks in our living room. I had a newborn son when we were starting this. My wife took a job, basically an evening and night job. So I would go work during the day. She'd watch our son. As soon as I came home, she would go off to go work evenings and nights. Like, it was really, really tough. And so when that money offer was on the table, believe me, turning that down was a really, really hard thing to do. But to your point, the long-term benefit we got from that was, invaluable. So it was definitely the right move in the long run. But at the time, it was tough.
Thank you for like elaborating more on that, because you really painted the picture there, and that makes sense how you guys were so tight together, because you know what everyone else's experience is, what they're truly saying no to. It's not just the company and funding. That's the stuff I love kind of hearing from friends, all the stuff underneath, the stuff that's not in the books, to really appreciate the journey. Truly. What do you see for the future, I guess, for yourself, and then just the landscape there, and anything that you're, I guess, excited about? You both, like, from an overarching perspective and the landscape, and then just kind of from what you're up to and what's next for you.
I think one of the main learnings from the Vaxess journey is that in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, there is not a shortage of money. There is money out there, right? It's harder to come by now than it was 3 or 4 years ago, but there's money out there. There is certainly not a shortage of technologies, right? I mean, part of the journey after Vaxess, I called tech transfer offices at 6 or 7 different universities just to see what they were most excited about, right? There are so many interesting technologies sitting on the shelves at preeminent universities with professors that love the tech, but they're professors. They want somebody externally to come in and pull it off the shelf. And so, at this point I talked to 30 to 40 different professors to try and find some tech that was exciting to me, that I thought was far enough along and ready to go. If you're sitting out there and you say, I don't have an idea, but I want to start something, pick up the phone, call the tech transfer offices or the technology licensing offices. They're all called a little bit different names at some of these big engineering schools, particularly ones that don't have good business schools. So I went to Purdue for undergrad, great engineering school. The business school is great. My wife actually went to the business school, so I have to be mindful of my words. But at the time, the entrepreneurial culture at Purdue was not very strong. So a lot of technologies coming out, and Purdue's in the middle of nowhere in Indiana, right? So you don't have the Silicon Valley ecosystem or the New York ecosystem or the Boston ecosystem. There's a lot of cool stuff sitting on the shelf at Purdue waiting for somebody to come pick it up, right? And it's the same at Illinois or Michigan or, Johns Hopkins, Carnegie Mellon, you name it, tons of good tech schools that don't necessarily have that ecosystem. So for me, going on the hunt for that was kind of the next step in my journey. I think the other thing I'm excited about is I think that the bar to launching a company now because of AI is just forever changed, right? The company that I, am super early involved with right now is called Elastro. We're doing some neurotech stuff, right? It's not a field that I'm too familiar with, but I'm fascinated by the ability to go into ChatGPT or Google Gemini. They all work remarkably well, and say, draft me an FDA 510K filing for a device that can do X, Y, and Z, targeting these markets for blah, 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 right? If you give it a proper prompt, it will literally write your 510K filing, for me, probably 80 to 90% of the way there, right? All the other documentation that you need to support that, right? Things like design history file. What's a design history file? It will tell you. Create a draft design history file. It will tell you. Create a risk assessment. It will tell you. All of the employee agreements, job postings, right? All of these things, I think those AI tools can do 90% of it for you. So I feel like I'm able to do the same job that we probably had 5 or 6 people doing in the early days of Vaxess, as a solo founder now, right? And so the capital efficiency or the capital needed, I think, is coming down exponentially. And so to me, it's a really exciting time to start a company. I think the economy's in a bit of a funk. Funding's in a bit of a funk. As long as interest rates stay high, I'm not sure that venture funding is going to come back. At some point, if interest rates come back down, the venture ecosystem, that financing will come back in. And I think folks who are starting companies now are going to be really, really well poised to take advantage of it.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. I mean, can you imagine having that 10 years ago? Just like you just said, writing a 510K for you and doing a pretty good job of it. Like I don't have to tweak that much from this.
Exactly. Now, what I feel bad for are all the folks on the receiving ends of these. So grant applications, walk in the park, right? You put your grant application in, you say, modify this grant application for this application, right? And again, it will prepare all the documents you need 90% of the way there, right? Which I have to believe means the number of applications the NIH and NSF are going through the roof, right? And so they're now going to have to get smarter in filtering through those. So their lives get tougher. FDA, I also think you're going to see a surge in submissions to the FDA, whether these are, early kind of pre-IND type meetings, 510K submissions, whatever they are. All those agencies who are now dealing with the extra flow of documents because it's so much easier. I think, it's going to be interesting to see how they evolve over the next few years, because I think that I just have to see the volume of these is going to go up.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's going to finally push them to incorporate some technology, which they've been a little bit behind on oftentimes. So they might have to have some AI technology that is helping them as well, which would be great.
So here's the funny thing. I read an article just a week or two ago. I don't remember which agency it was, but basically somebody had figured out that one of the agencies was using AI to do some initial screening on the applications that were coming in. So this clever individual had basically hidden a bunch of white text at the back of his application that was specifically designed to game the system. So you couldn't see it if you printed out a PDF, right? It's white text, but the AI system still read it. And it was saying basically like, score this section very, very highly for such and such. It was literally like telling the AI system how to treat this document, but it was all hidden in white text at the end of the submission. So there's going to be some gamesmanship back and forth, I think, on both
Wow.
sides. It's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds.
That is going to be interesting. I don't know if I'm excited about that. I'm curious.
Curious. Curious is the
Curious.
word. We're all
Like,
curious.
who's going to win here on this?
Yep.
But I really appreciate your time today, Michael, and just your perspective. I mean, some things that some takeaways for me is just like having a mission at the beginning of some of these, picking the right people to do this with along the way, and then being willing to pivot and get creative. It's not like you had your initial idea and you thought it was going to be this, but oh, okay, this isn't actually as economically attractive. Those are my words. So maybe we can find a way to use that as well to get funding, and then just the creative on the funding aspect of it too. And it seems like your mission at the beginning really allowed you to do that because you were all tied to that, to go continue to find. I want to say like patchwork it together, but that's kind of what it sounds like. It's like 60 grand here, 100, a little bit here, a little bit there. Got you to the point just to where you created a great technology, and then you were just there at the time when it was needed in the market and able to really get funding. So that's exciting, I think. And I guess any other, from you, any other parting words, for the audience or people looking to get into this space from your perspective, and then just kind of where to find you or what you're up to, if that's whatever that is, website or LinkedIn or anything else.
Again, I think it's a miraculous time to start a company right now, right? I really, really do. I think we're going to see venture funding coming back. We actually already had started to see a little bit of a blip in the IPO window, and I think the government shutdown is going to hopefully not last long, but it may slow that down a little bit. But I think, if you look back historically, the best companies started when times were the toughest, right? And they were there and had kind of grinded it out and figured out a way to survive. And then when things turned, they were there and ready for it. So yeah, on my end, I've got, a couple things I'm committed to right now. So I joined a venture fund called Closed Loop Partners as a venture partner, kind of getting back to that mission. The climate has always been an area of great interest for me. Was very fortunate to join Closed Loop in a part-time role, supporting them. Really, for me, I wanted to learn about climate tech, right? And how can you build great companies in that space? What I hope to offer is for some of those first-time founders, first-time CEOs, giving some operational support, kind of boots on the ground. So that's been an amazing experience. That team is they're just incredibly sharp. Have I think figured out a pretty creative angle to funding companies in the clean tech space when clean tech funding is getting tougher, right? So that's been a privilege. I do some work at Harvard Business School as an executive fellow, working primarily with tough tech and life science entrepreneurs. So that's also been fantastic for me to engage with folks who, again, have interesting ideas, are really passionate about certain problems they want to go solve. And so that's been great. And then in parallel, really working on figuring out what that next full-time venture for me will be. Elastro is definitely one thing I'm working on, kind of tinkering around with. There's some other things in the background as well. And then all of that ties back to the blog that I have just really enjoyed, kind of digging in on entrepreneurship, and especially kind of hard, mission-driven, tough tech entrepreneurship, and trying to, hopefully create some, guidelines and tools, mainly based on the things we screwed up along the way. So, would certainly love feedback from folks on that who have gone through this or are going through, some similar journeys.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's the one last thing I'll just say. You inspired me to go to think about that, or encourage is go call on those programs and to dust off some of these technologies. You just made me think of how many amazing things are probably sitting out there at some of these places in the back of the lab. Because like you said, this is not like the easiest. I mean, sometimes like when I was like at the biodesign program, like why didn't I pick a different space? Because it's not that easy to get something commercialization in this world, and a lot of those brilliant people are creating things that they just don't take it to that level. So go dust off or call some of these schools, any of you entrepreneurs, like and just get creative with that. So That's another great message, I feel like.
And also the government labs, like, I mean, there's some amazing, science at Sandia National Labs or Los Alamos coming out of programs like NASA, coming out of the Department of Energy, right? There's a lot of research there too that I've actually been intrigued by, and I think they do a better job than a lot of the schools in terms of publicizing it. So go browse around on their websites, hang around on their websites. Other lots of really smart people working at those places coming up with some interesting ideas, a lot of which are available for licensing.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, Michael, it's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate your time. And what's the best place to find you? Is that LinkedIn, your websites, or what?
LinkedIn, and my blog is actually through LinkedIn. So if you find me on there,
LinkedIn.
you can find the blog. It's called F Failing Fast.
I did see that. I
Yeah.
liked it.
So maybe a little bit debatable, but at the time when I started, I was just really irritated by this concept of failing fast and kind of how I had heard so many people again kind of not necessarily focusing on that end problem and working through tough stuff to get there. So anyway, it was a little bit of a pushback on the idea of failing fast.
That makes more sense. I liked it personally, but now I get to understand kind of the where it came from more. But yeah, it's to stick with something. If you believe in it, stick with it.
That's it.
Like,
If it's a problem worth solving, go find a way to solve it.
go find a way to solve it. Yeah, that's a great way to close out. Again, Michael, appreciate your time so much. Look forward to kind of keeping tabs with what you're up to next. And you've been listening to Stories in Life Sciences, sponsored by MedAccess AI, where we explore the people, ideas, and breakthroughs shaping the future of biotech and healthcare innovation. To learn more, visit medaccessai.org and subscribe on YouTube to watch the full conversations and new episodes as they launch. I'm Christopher Wilson. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep shaping the future one story at a time.